Alright, so here we can see the main five nations involved in the Arctic sovereignty debate. And it is worth noting that Greenland, being Denmark and Norway, and the entire sort of Scandinavian contingent are sort of operating as one and are probably going to operate as one because of their European base. But what we can basically see here is Alaska to the bottom left of the screen, and we'll go around counterclockwise. But Alaska is what we're talking about, the pretty large American settlement. There are, tens of thousands of people in Alaska. It's a full state of the Union of America, and it is pretty far north on the latitude, up around 50, 60 degrees at its sort of median border, and it stretches right out into the territories with Russia. And so, even though it's small, it's very significant. Of course, it represents the American interest, but it is a really really small portion. So it'll be interesting to really see what happens. Canada is, of course, natural ally of the United States, and we have next to Russia, the largest terrestrial border. You can see this scattering of islands up here um, constitute quite a land front in the Arctic, and it's in deep. It's the closest kind of to the North Pole that you can see there, and it really is much larger than any of the other claimants except for Russia. And Canada and Alaska together, with probably some sort of neutrality from Denmark, they make up a comparable area to what Russia has there. But it'll be interesting to see the interplay of politics, and that's the issues that really come up with Arctic sovereignty. You wouldn't think it's a very significant development, but it has the potential to really be a very significant development. It's We've always thought of the Arctic as sort of a little just white trim along the top of the border, but hopefully you get the sense from this image. I've kept in a bit of the atmospheric flow over here because this is a pretty good chunk of the Earth that we're dealing with here. We're used to viewing the world one way, but this is really an uncharted area. And what I've come to think of it as is sort of like when there was a new world discovered across the ocean. And a friend of mine pointed out that it's kind of sad that whenever we discover new territories and resources, there always seems to be a national conflict that involves war. And we've seen that even in the Middle East of late, where we thought we were kind of running out of resources. We even went into area, I mean, our side, America and England and Europe, we went into an area because basically, we were provoked, but then we kind of have been staying and developing it in a way that is getting us all of the resources. And so we did it in sort of the least developed areas of the world that we could. No one was going to tolerate another rush into Africa like that, least of all the Africans. Absolutely none of them. But so we moved our ambitions kind of to the Middle East and have been exploiting resources there. So it is worth noting that there's a lot of legal and logistical and physical implications to what could happen in the north here over the Arctic sovereignty debate, especially when Russia's been playing a pretty silent hand in affairs in the Middle East. They're kind of playing both sides and taking it easy and trying to keep everyone happy. But this is a brand new front that actually seems to have been very ill considered in the past. We've sort of neglected it in every way. Certainly in media consciousness, it's funny, after I decided to take this assignment because I was already interested in it, there were a number of events which we'll get into, but they all kind of started happening right around then. And so it's been interesting studying this, and we'll get to the next slide here. Okay, now this is what has traditionally been called maritime borders, and they represent about 200 kilometers away from territorial claims of the country. Now, these borders I've only outlined the north, but if you were to follow the one around Russia, right around this kind of southerny, well, I should say bottom, because north and south are precarious at this location. But at the sort of bottom of Russia's flank here, what's going on is that red would wrap around and come in till it became Asian territory, but then that same ribbon would just change countries. Same as down Greenland on the other side. That it extends all the way around. I'm just trying to outline the northern borders here. But these borders were ratified by the United Nations in the 1970s as part of establishing maritime controls in international water systems and this and that. And also it gives protected economic zones, which has been a focus of some of our studies about Canada over this class. But the protected economic zones around a country and their access to waters and regulations for fisheries and all these kinds of things and trade lanes and whatnot have all generally been administered throughout history by this kind of 200-mile buffer around. And the United Nations seems to have been very effective with this. One of their better, you know, resolutions, in that almost every country around the world has adopted this system, this 200-mile system. And the waters that are beyond that 200 miles, they fall under the jurisdiction of international law. And so there's a lot people don't know about the legalities of this, but international waters and international law is completely separate than any kind of national law. Now, whenever you have a vessel, generally you're required to fly a flag of your home country and be subject to those laws or whatever. But you can register ships anywhere and kind of pick what laws you want and be a sort of free roaming citizen of the world when you're on the ocean. Well, the North Pole here and the Arctic ice sheets that you can see in this whole kind of really deep Arctic Ocean and this entire region inside of this sphere, these red lines that I've indicated around these nations, you can kind of fill in the little gap there at the top between Norway and Greenland. And that whole area is totally unclaimed. There's absolutely no territorial claims on it. Russia, Alaska, Canada, even Greenland, which is way up there, and even Norway, which has the island of Longyearbyen. It's actually called Svalbard, I think, but the city is Longyearbyen. But these areas here, everything inside of the red is totally unclaimed according to international law. Now, for a long time, no one cared because there was apparently nothing under it. But now they've come to realize that there actually are probably rather significant mineral deposits and stuff, as well as hydrocarbon oils, which is gasoline. They estimate that this could be a very, very significant find of these things. And I also, in another class, have been studying the planet and did my ISU for that class on the Aurora. And I found a ton of information that's very new science that's about how this kind of circle that we've drawn, I'll have a better image later, but the Arctic Circle apparently produces hundreds of gigawatts, I think, per year, but just phenomenal amounts of electricity, like nearly half of the world's current energy supply. And I always think that's really good because I think right now we're sort of like the SUVs of human civilization where we're just like consuming the ultimate maximum. But we can certainly bring that down. And if that's possible between the two poles, there's very significant energy resources there. And this is the thing with Russia too. They've become a major producer of petroleum in the last few years, and all the implications of this on a global stage are very significant to international law and Canadian law in particular. We'll get into some of the details about what Canada's doing, but this is the traditional maritime border that the United Nations didn't so much impose as it did recognize. And that has left the area inside of those borders totally unclaimed, and now we've discovered there's a vast wealth of resources.